Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. More specifically, a brand new Albums I Missed video. Dude, March wasn't just cram-packed with new music, it was overflowing. Oh my goodness, there were so many jams and bops and gnarly ragers every single week of this past month. Probably doesn't help that I didn't actually review music last week. I opted to do some silly, goofy videos instead, which is fine, which was fun to do, and I might do more of that in the future. But still, the point is, lots of music, so let's not waste any time. Let's just get right the goddamn holy fuck into it. First up, we have the Fascination Street Sessions EP from Ishan, who I guess at this point is committed to doing EPs almost exclusively? I mean, that's kind of all he has done for the last, 5-6 years or so. I'm not really complaining, I just think that's kind of interesting. Whatever. New Ishan. That's all that really ultimately matters. This EP shows Ishan returning to some more progressive and experimental endeavors, with some very moody and eclectic prog rock and prog metal with special guests, jazzy flavors, melancholic soundscapes. Some more extreme elements remain, but they are implemented more in the way that Opeth used to incorporate, like gutturals and like death metal and black metal elements and the like. I would say overall, this thing actually reminds me a lot of Opeth, especially on the first two tracks. The final number, Dom Andras, reminds me more of like Catatonia, no doubt partially because of the presence of Johann Rensk. I don't really have a ton to say about it. It's just Ishan making really good, really pretty, really well-polished prog rock and prog metal. If that sounds cool to you, you'll very likely enjoy the ever-loving shit out of this EP. Next up, we have Jericho, brand new studio album from Last in Line, Dio tribute band featuring two former members of the Dio solo band, Vivian Campbell and Vinny Appice. And it's fine, I guess. I don't know. It's pretty straightforward, like classic heavy metal and hard rock. It feels like a watered-down continuation of what Dio was kind of doing in, like, the mid to late 80s, which, ironic, considering these guys performed on, like, the earliest records, like Holy Diver and The Last in Line. It's by no means incompetent or horrible or offensive or anything like that. It's just kind of boring. Like, there's nothing happening on this record that a slew of younger, retro rock and metal bands aren't doing so much better. There's nothing happening on this album that a lot of these guys haven't done better with other projects. There's nothing happening on this album that, Dio himself didn't do better back in the day, which is worth noting because, again, this is essentially a Dio tribute band. If you're one of those guys who sits around talking about how all modern music sucks and, rock music is dead and all that, maybe you'll get a kick out of this. To everyone else, skip. Not really worth it. Next up, we have Katharsis from Keep of Kalessin, who I've never really spent a ton of time with, but for the most part, I would say that I've enjoyed their music, and Katharsis, for the most part, is no exception. It's fast and big and brutal and very in-your-face with pummeling blast beats and tremolo riffs, but it has an appropriate amount of theatricality and melodrama to it without reaching, the overbearing cheese and cringe levels of something like, say, Dimmu Borgir or Cradle of Filth. A lot of cool synth work, a lot of strong, anthemic melodies and hooks. I like the balance of symphonic black metal, melodic black metal, and, blackened death metal. The songwriting can be repetitive here and there, especially on longer tracks like the Obsidian Expanse, Throne of Excavation, the Omni. As such, my interest does begin to wane just a bit. But overall, if you're looking for some over-the-top black metal grandiosity, I don't think you'll have too much of an issue with this record. Check it out. Next up, we have Silhouettes of Disgust from Downfall of Gaia. I'm not really familiar with these guys at all. I don't think I've heard anything from them beforehand. But if their previous albums are anything like this, I think I'm gonna change that. Very melancholic, misty, haunting, emotionally charged black metal and post-metal with some really strong riffery, some really great ambient atmospheric sections like these wailing clean vocals. It's a really intense record consistently, whether it's throwing some full-on black metal bombast at you, or whether it's going into more like melancholic and gloomy territory, or whether it's doing something else entirely, like throwing some other weird flavors and twists and turns. Which it most certainly does, although not in like a super obvious kind of way. Like as the album progresses, it'll throw in some more angular arrangements, it'll throw in like these really kind of like droning melodies, almost like something pulled from like Silent Hill or some shit. Yeah, I really dig this record. Part of me wishes that I had reviewed this on the Metal Meltdown. Had I done so, we'd be looking at a solid 4 out of 5. I really like this, and I look forward to checking out more of Downfall of Gaia's discography after this. Next up, we have The Orb from Gorod, quite possibly one of the most consistent tech death bands in recent memory, and yeah, The Orb is no fucking exception whatsoever. I mean, these guys just don't fucking miss. The musicianship, the songwriting, the production, the brutality, the intelligence of the record itself, all fucking on point. Bangers for days, lots of twists and turns, it's unpredictable, it's fun, it's clean, it's heavy. I will say I don't like this as much as I do other tech death records that came out this month, like Time Will Take Us All from Entheos and Sage of Shekinah from Contrarian, the former of which just had a lot more going emotionally for it, whereas the latter just was way heavier, way crazier. Like, if we were ranking all of those records right now, Entheos at number 1, Contrarian number 2, Gorod number 3. But hey, ain't nothing wrong with a bronze medal. If I won a bronze medal at the Olympics, fuck it. You didn't win a bronze medal at the Olympics. I did. I made it to the fucking Olympics. So Gorod ain't got nothing to worry about. They still made it to the Olympics. They still kick ass. Definitely check this out if you're hungry for some gnarly tech death, because Gorod serves it up quick, fast, clean, and healthy as fuck. Next up, we have Heavener from Event Animate. We got quite a few requests to review this in the past month. I can kind of see why. There's a lot to admire about this record. The very wide, open, spacey production. It has a very lush, evocative, enveloping feel and atmosphere. There's these almost alt-metal, shoegazy kinds of vocals and soundscapes that bring to mind like more recent stuff from Lantlos and even like Deftones and Hum. There are some really great guitar tones and riffs and such like that. You know, it's jagged, it's technical, feels very much in the realm of what I would expect from Periphery nowadays. Ultimately, the songwriting itself, though, is a little one-dimensional and repetitive for my liking. Like, it relies on the same basic structures and formulas that we've come to expect from progressive metalcore, and it doesn't really do much with them. Like, for me at least, the vibe and the feel of this record, like the vocals and the production and the atmosphere, that's what's kept me interested. The music itself, I mean, it was just kind of boring for me. Had I gone ahead and reviewed this, it probably would have gotten a 3 out of 5, but leaning heavily towards a 2.5 out of 5. It's got some sweet, sugary, pretty, delicious icing for sure, but the cake itself, kind of underwhelming, kind of unremarkable. Not terrible, just not amazing. Next up, we have Apocalypse from Rotten Sound. 20 tracks, 18 minutes of politically charged, in-your-face, grindcore and extreme metal, and I dig the fuck out of it. Lots of crazed, bloodthirsty, hyper-violent riffery and percussion and vocal work. This thing is just constantly barking and bashing and pounding and pummeling at the skull, at your frontal lobe. A lot of commentary about social media, the 24-hour news cycle, suburban life, the environment, patriotism. It's painting a picture of a modern apocalypse, one without fire and brimstone, one simply based on the truly fucked up circumstances that we are living in nowadays. Makes this thing all the more urgent, all the more poignant, all the more relevant. I dig it, big time. It probably wouldn't change your mind if you fucking hate grindcore, but for people who love grindcore, this is what you want. This is literally exactly what you want from the genre. I see no reason why you wouldn't enjoy this. Next up, we have Outsider, the third studio album from Night Demon, another modern heavy metal band playing classic old-school heavy metal with grace, with intelligence, with balance, with brains, and also big, gnarly, fun riffs. Like when I said earlier that there are new bands playing the old school style better than Last in Line, bands like Night Demon specifically were who I were referring to. Like, this is a very well-paced record with bright, loud, but not overwhelming and dynamic production. The riffs are strong, the hooks are strong, there's a good amount of variety in the music. Like, there are some slower parts, some more epic doomier parts, some classic hard rock flavors thrown in, some more classic speed and even thrash metal style riffery thrown in. It doesn't waste any time whatsoever, clocking in at 37 minutes. There's no fat, there's no filler, there's literally nothing I would want to scrap from this record at all. It's just a very well-made heavy metal album. It's got that old school spirit and charm and energy, but it doesn't feel derivative of, say, Judas Priest or Iron Maiden or Saxon or Motorhead or whomever. It actually has its own vibe. It has modern production value. It has its own influences and ideas. Mad respect. I dig the fuck out of it. When I'm in the mood for, like, modern heavy metal, this is the kind of stuff that I'm looking for. Hell yes. Definitely check this bad boy out. Next up we have from Western Shores, another dose of old school heavy metal delivered by a more modern band. This time a little more epic, this time leaning more towards like some adventurous old school power metal. And while it can be a little corny and hokey at times, it's fun. It's very well made, a lot of soaring riffs and melodies. There is a real sense of, like, adventure and curiosity through this. Like, I feel like I'm exploring vast lands with Gatekeeper across this thing. Some songs have a bit of a proggy underbelly to it, combined with, you know, those classic metal guitar gallops and those big soaring vocals. I'm almost reminded of, like, late 80s Iron Maiden, you know, stuff like Somewhere in Time, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. I'm also reminded of, like, Sabotage and Crimson Glory. It's still, like, really muscular and tough and burly, though. Like, would not shock me at all to hear that these guys were, like, really into Manowar. Yeah, another solid dose of old-school heavy metal charm and spirit. I'm probably more likely to play this at a D&D session, or maybe while playing, like, a Lord of the Rings video game, whereas Night Demon I would actually play at a party when I have friends over and stuff. But still, great record. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Next up, we have The Burden of Faith from Of Sulfur. Despite only being a debut album, there's been a lot of hype and anticipation surrounding this band, surrounding this album, and I can mostly see why? There's definitely a lot of ambition and talent here. That's not up for debate. Like, Of Sulfur are playing around with, like, blackened death metal, deathcore, symphonic metal, and brutal death metal, and, you know, all these guys are individually very talented, but on top of that, they're bringing in special guest stars like Howard Jones, Lindsay Schoolcraft, Alex Terrible from Slaughter to Prevail, Kyle Medina from Body Snatcher, Taylor Barber from Left to None. But I think this thing is ultimately crushed under the weight of its ambition and of its massive cast of talent. Like, there's just kind of a lot constantly happening. A lot of blast beats, a lot of strings, a lot of layered vocal assaults, and it can be a bit much. It doesn't reach the ear fatigue of something like Pain Remains from Lorna Shore, but it does come damn near close. Like, it can be a bit overwhelming. I also mentioned Pain Remains from Lorna Shore specifically because this thing definitely kind of feels like it's kind of trying to ride the coattails of that record. I will say that this is a bit more comprehensible than Pain Remains, and I will say that there's probably a little bit more variety, all things considered, but ultimately it stumbles in a lot of the same places, on top of feeling a little derivative. I think overall it's still, like, decent, and I definitely think there's still fun to be had with this thing, but yeah, I don't know if I'm entirely sold on Of Sulfur just yet. Who knows? Maybe the next album will change that for me, though. Next up, we have Parasitic Population from In the Act of Violence, some brutal slamming deathcore from my neck of the woods, Toronto, Ontario. Hell yeah. And it's cool. It's solid. It's alright. I dig it. By no means groundbreaking, by no means revolutionary, but it is brutal, and it is slamming, and it does pretty much everything I would expect an album of this style to do. I like the more erratic guitar work, I like the deep, grisly, guttural vocals, I like how slimy everything, I like how monstrous everything is. I do wish we had a bigger, beefier guitar tone. This thing can feel kind of flat and thin at times. Like something in the vein of what we heard from Sanguisugabog on Homicidal Ecstasy would fit this perfectly. But overall, I would say I enjoyed it. If you're just looking for some repulsive, brutal death metal and deathcore, you can't really go wrong with this. Next up, we have Betrayal from Necro Panther, and this is just fun, nasty, gnarly, straight for the fucking jugular, like, thrashy black death metal with, like, big melodies, epic guitar work, a lot of ferocity, a lot of intensity. The early Skeleton Witch vibes are very, very, very strong on this thing, but there are some more nuanced vocal assaults and arrangements that wouldn't be out of place on, like, Ritual or Ever Black era Black Dahlia Murder as well. It's got a few mid-pace metal stompers to it. It's got some more epic endeavors and moments as well. It's got moments of full-blown, nasty, shitty, pissy, blackened thrash, almost reminding me of Toxic Holocaust as well. It's just a really fun, really well-made record. I've never heard of Necro Panther before Betrayal. I'm definitely gonna make sure I check out more of their stuff, because this thing just kicks ass. Like, if you just want full-on extremity in the most fun way possible, this is it. Straight up. Next up, we have Vast Reach's Unclaimed, brand new studio album from Majesties. There was a lot of hype surrounding this thing at the beginning of March. A lot of people saying this, more so than the new In Flames record, is a true return to the days of classic In Flames, records like Lunar Strain, The Jester Race. And I would agree with that, honestly. There are a lot of, like, vocal dynamics and arrangements and a lot of guitar parts and solos and soundscapes that absolutely would fit in just fine with a lot of what In Flames was doing on early records like the Lunar Strain and the Jester Race and the Subterranean EP as well. And yet, I'm not really that into this. And I think for me it's because this thing never really evolves beyond simply being a nostalgic throwback to that era and that time. Compare that to stuff from like Night Demon and Gatekeeper, where, you know, the 80s metal influences are worn quite proudly on their sleeves, you know? Like, they're super into, like, Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, and Gatekeeper is super into, like, Manowar and Savatage as well, but it never really feels like a simple rebranding of that particular style. Like, there's enough of their own ideas and enough of their own uniqueness thrown into it. Whereas this really is just, like, a total throwback. A damn good one at that, but just a throwback nonetheless. And honestly, even then, I'm still kind of like, I'd rather just listen to Lunar Strain and the Jester Race, if we're being fully honest. Like, it apes so much from those albums, and yet is just nowhere near as good as those albums, in my opinion. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm just kind of not feeling it, despite its best efforts, despite it ultimately being a good album. I want to make it clear, I don't hate this thing, I don't think it's terrible. I'm just kind of like, I don't know, I'm just not feeling it. Plain and simple. Next up, we have Of the Sign from Spirit Possession, and this thing sounds like fire and evil and hatred rising up from the depths of hell itself. A lot of hectic, unorthodox vocal assaults, a lot of intense, brutal, like, blackened, heavy metal riffery and firepower. It's dramatic and dark and mystical and foreboding. It very consistently sounds like the armies of hell rallying together to prepare an assault on planet Earth, on mankind. And I really dig it, man. I love those first wave black metal influences. I love the atmosphere. I love the cavernous, hellish production. I like the more archaic lyricism. I like how frantic and, like, bloodthirsty this whole thing is. One of my favorite albums of the month, honestly. One of the best kind of black metal records I think I've heard so far this year. Fantastic record. And now let's start wrapping things up with Death Age from Kommand. A good old slab of underground, old school death metal. Do I even need to say more? honestly. These guys love Bolt Thrower and Grave and like early Entombed and Cannibal Corpse. If they do listen to modern death metal, it's probably stuff that also is full-blown old-school death metal worship, like Undeath, maybe Sanguisugabog. It's brutal, it's pummeling, it's straightforward, it doesn't waste any time, clocking in at 26 minutes long. And it's fun. I mean, it won't change any hearts and minds, like if you despise the old school death metal revival, or for that matter, if you're just not into death metal whatsoever, you're probably not gonna like this. You're probably not. Don't even bother checking it out. But if you love all of the bands we've mentioned, and if generally speaking you love this old school death metal revival, I don't see why you wouldn't get a kick out of this. And voila! Albums I missed, March 2023. That probably doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the amount of music that came out this past month, but fuck it, I'm gonna end it here, because I want to go eat breakfast, and I also have to go to work. I have to let life happen. I have to not sit here and just do this. My life can't just be this. It fucking can't. So therefore, we're done. I feel like I covered a bulk of the most interesting material to come out in this past month, but if you do feel there's anything that I absolutely must check out that I haven't talked about, let me know in the comments below. Press this button to subscribe. Look, more videos here. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.